Currently the Boyd Tinsley Distinguished Professor at UNC. His expansive research includes a recent study on child poverty in North Carolina. Thank you, Gene, for being with us.
I just wanted to say what an honor it is to be here. I wish it was in person, as Carl said, but I have come to know the High Point community a little bit, and it is a home to great heroism for me. And so it's an honor to share the screen with you, even if not a room. I want to start just by saying I've been working in low-income communities in North Carolina for the last 15 years or so, and I've learned 4 lessons. I would start quickly with those. The first is, maybe unsurprisingly to folks on this Zoom, that the hardship which is experienced, economic hardship experienced by our sisters and brothers across North Carolina is more pronounced, more wrenching than most of us know. Secondly, in every corner, every community of North Carolina, you will find selfless, inspirational, generous folks working against the odds to try and further the plight of their sisters and brothers. The way I put it, if Mother Teresa were alive today and living in North Carolina, she would not be lonely. The efforts of love and generosity which come from our broader community inspire. And folks in this room know that. Third, if we could line up every one of those great people working against the odds to try and ease the plight of their brothers, they would all tell us this, that the chasm of need in North Carolina statewide far exceeds anything that they can supply, regardless of how hard they work. They might even, if they were inclined, quote Augustine to say that charity cannot make up for the want of justice. And fourth, I think they would almost all say, even if it's not reflective of efforts in High Point to some degree, that that gap is getting worse year after year, month after month, no matter what you might read or what we might hear proclaimed. The gap between the services that can be provided and the need which exists gets larger, not smaller. So that makes it particularly thrilling and an honor to be in such company. When I think of lessons I have learned in High Point, I think of folks like Carl Bierling, of course, and Jackie Davis, Joe Williams, Patrick Harmon, Jerry Mingo, Michael Ellerby, Dan Hodgson, Jim Sumi, lots of others, but heroes first to last. It's an honor to be in High Point in particular, which to me, I'm not saying I know every community of North Carolina, but I know a lot of them. And I think of High Point as the Tar Heel city, which in my view is taken most seriously and most broadly and most encompassingly and most constructively, and now maybe most enduringly. I was very happy to see the results of this new High Point University study, but taken most seriously the crushing challenge of hunger. It turns out apparently that not all publicity is bad if it mobilizes generous hearts to do something, to open their eyes and their ears and their souls to the plight of their sisters and brothers, and to do it for more than a day or a weekend or in a food drive, but with steely determination to match the need with their efforts. This summit, the Greater High Point Food Alliance, and the broad group of friends it brings together. You are remarkable folks. It's an honor to share the screen. And I want to start with some things that I have heard or been told in the last recent months. I want to share some of them with you. And then I'll talk more generally about childhood poverty and childhood hunger in North Carolina. These things I'm going to say at first may seem as a group a little disjointed, but I think we'll find that they're not. First, from Erling Middleton of North Carolina's East and Central Food Bank in Raleigh. These are the conversations that aren't had often enough. We need to assure that there are meals for everyone, and we can do it. These conversations need to reach our lawmakers who do not seem to know or care about the issues. It seems like our lawmakers haven't experienced poverty or hunger, or if they did, it was too long ago. They've forgotten it or ignored it. It's really important to press this conversation forward. All our children deserve to eat. Or Tina Postal of Loaves and Fishes in Charlotte. We need most of all compassionate policy making, policies making a living wage and affordable housing a reality. If you did those two things, Tina said, it would put Loaves and Fishes out of business, and we'd be happy to be put out of business. I would love to be forced to go into another line of work. I dare them to put us out of business. Many of our policymakers' lives apparently don't include the experiences of low-wage people, or if they did, they're too far away from it now. They don't deliver compassionate policy making. Something's got to give. Or my colleague, Alexandra Sirota at the Budget and Tax Center. What we should do is shift the focus to what kids need to thrive. It's expensive to ignore the needs of kids. Let's also stop all this focus on deserving versus undeserving children. There's also the presence, or rather the dominance, of race in our decision making. There's no future without supporting our kids, all our kids, for what they need to be successful. It's what matters most. Let's make the investments our kids need, public schools, libraries, families, food, resources, and the rest. Make that be the only test, not as it is now, just serving those at the top. Tina Postal, again, of Loaves and Fishes. The biggest determinant of hunger and poverty and opportunity here where I live is your zip code. We know well the attempts to shield younger children, the mom who skips a meal for her kids to be able to eat, or who, as I saw a few days ago, the older brother who came in with his mom and who told me he'd been skipping breakfast because he wanted his younger brother to be able to eat what they had. He was so excited when he saw that we had boxes of cereal. He was thrilled. And I thought it shouldn't be that way in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the United States. And Ms. Postal added, we think it's their fault that they can't get enough to eat. We like to think that. We're a lot more comfortable thinking that. It means that maybe we don't have any responsibility to help, but it's not true. I explained to a lot of folks that they ought to come see. Very few ever do. Folks like to live in their own bubble. That way they don't have to think about those who don't have the resources and assets that they do. And Laura Dill, the director of operations at Table, which distributes food to kids and their families here where I live in Orange County. You can get grumpy when you're hungry. You can't concentrate. All you can think about is your empty stomach. And when you're chronically hungry, of course, you're going to act out. Of course, you're going to have trouble concentrating. On Mondays here, we see the line to see the school nurse, and it often stretches out the door. Kids having headaches and stomach aches. because they've gone all weekend without enough food. They're not feeling good. They think about what that means, just in terms of missing class for the day or interrupting their learning. Or the marvelous Jackie Davis of D Up and High Point. Having food, secure and healthy food, dramatically affects these kids' lives. When they don't have food, it affects how they feel, how they learn. If they don't have breakfast, it affects their whole day. Then they get marked as a bad kid. Then another step is taken and they get headed down a wrong road. It's like I read Oprah saying, I used to ask what's wrong with that child. Now I ask, what happened to that child? Hungry kids can't learn. If they can't learn, they can't succeed. If they can't succeed, you can't be a contributing member of society. You have to fix hunger in order to fix generational poverty. Earlene Middleton offers a similar reaction. What happens to a kid when his stomach's growling? Then we see it becomes difficult to learn, to sit still in school. We see it affects his emotional health, and it can be passed to the next generation. That's the core of the injustice, etched in stone. Or Debbie Horowitz of Porsche says child poverty here is also physically hidden. We drive around in North Carolina where everything grows so lush, low-income housing and the trailer parks are behind the trees. We sometimes get a glimpse, but we're not exposed to it. You literally can't see it, echoes Table's Laura Dill, saying about kids and hunger. It's easy to blame other factors, but food insecurity is extensive here, even in the best of times, much less in the middle of COVID. Year after year, her annual client surveys come up with the same response, she says. 61% of our families report that the food we bought just didn't last and we didn't have enough money to get more. 69% report that sometimes, or they often even worry about getting enough food for their families. These are all families in Chapel Hill and Carrboro, one of the wealthiest school systems in the state. Or Jackie Davis again. We have kids that see violence and crime. We have some that sleep at night with gunshots. That aspect of being resilient is that, yeah, I slept half the night, not sure if the shot was aimed at my house or was just close, or if I could shut my eyes and go to sleep. Then I have to go to school. I may eat or I may not. Then I have my teachers telling me I need to perform, and the teachers don't understand when I can. As a community, we must learn to recognize the trauma and the adverse childhood experiences facing our children in order for us to assist and make an impact on their lives. Jerry Mingo, as you know, manages, among many other things, the Burns Hill Community Garden that donates produce to food pantries in High Point. Despite his commitment to those good efforts, Mingo doesn't sugarcoat their limitations. Food pantries and community gardens are not the end all to poverty. They won't solve our poverty and hunger issues. It's greenwashing, putting a Band-Aid on it. It's High Point's way of dealing with a hard set of issues. There are lots of blighted homes. Gardens won't fix that. We need to focus more on decent paying jobs. If people had decent jobs, they wouldn't be having these difficulties. There may be new jobs, but will they come to us and will they lift us out of poverty? We're leaving people to their own plight, but we need to step up and do this for ourselves, for our communities. For Judge David Lee, the presiding judge in the famous Leandro case, saying not to me, but to the people of North Carolina. This case is about children who are from high poverty, low performing districts and areas of our state that aren't given a fair opportunity to get a sound basic education. Unfortunately, from the numbers I have seen, the sheer number of those at-risk students has increased dramatically and continues to do so. over these last 3 decades. In that sense, it's a runaway train. And Tiffany Gladley, North Carolina child, stressing to us that North Carolina's kids are suffering. Our poverty rate is staggering, with 1 out of 5 children growing up in households below the poverty line. It's incumbent on us to ensure that we're invested in our kids and in our families. It's incumbent on us to ensure that every baby has the opportunity to thrive. And the great Joe Williams of the Triad Food Pantry in High Point puts it this way: we've got to have a common core, a common desire that everyone can help each other together. That's the secret. It's togetherness, unified through a common purpose, and that's to survive. The purpose is to survive until we die. We can survive hunger, we can survive heat, we can survive cold. The only way we can do that is through together. Surviving together, thriving through together. And from Resilience High Point, and one of my heroes, Patrick Harmon, a commitment to Compassion Charter. Adoptees agree that the city of High Point is a city with potential for abundant compassion and camaraderie. Adoptees realize that an increased understanding of those different from themselves can be enhanced by a compassionate heart. Those most vulnerable to inequalities and suffering and hardship belong in this city and deserve to feel welcome in their very home. Say glory. As to child poverty and hunger generally, North Carolina countenances stunning levels of child poverty. As we said, 1 in 5 of our kids are poor. That's from the federal standard of an income of about $25,000 a year for a family of 4. So let that sink in. If your family of 4 pulls in $26,000 a year, you're not in poverty. You're also not even close to being able to feed and clothe and support your family. We have the 10th highest state rate in the country. The youngest of our kids are the poorest, 22% of kids 5 and under. 1 in 10 of North Carolina children lives in extreme poverty at incomes of half the federal poverty level, $12,500 a year for a family of 4. Child poverty in North Carolina is both highly racialized and gendered. Kids of color, poor kids of color, are impoverished at 3 times the rate of white kids, 35%. And the Census Bureau reports that, quote, female-headed households are disproportionately impoverished across the state. Childhood poverty in the past 2 decades, and this is true in High Point, has also become decidedly more heavily concentrated. 4 times as many kids compared to the year 2000 now live in high poverty neighborhoods, which multiplies their challenges, since not only their own economic barriers, but those of their neighbors plague them. And as concentrated poverty research proves, these concentrations crush economic mobility, as Charlotte and Goldsboro, to name just 2, can so powerfully teach. Tar Heel child poverty is also geographically skewed. Some eastern North Carolina counties have remarkably high levels of poor kids, some approaching 50%, if you can imagine. And even as we have ups and downs economically across Carolina over the decades, we have gotten used to extraordinarily high levels of child poverty. It seems somehow unremarkable to us, maybe unworthy of our attentions. It's apparently not worrisome like things like critical race theory in the public schools, or transgender folks in our bathrooms or on our school sports teams. We're used to it, I guess, but we get used to things we should never get used to. Child hunger or food insecurity or food hardship, the notion that kids can't get enough to eat mirrors child poverty in North Carolina. 1 in 5 of our kids are food insecure, according to the federal government, some 500,000 or more. We have the 11th highest rate in the country. 78 of our 100 counties have child hunger rates of over 20%. In most counties, the majority, more than 1 in 4 kids are food insecure. And again, hunger is racialized and gendered. Female-headed households see much greater levels of hunger. 62% of white households are food secure, though only 43% of Black and Latino families are. 250,000 North Carolina households are SNAP recipients, food stamp recipients, 21%. 6 out of 10 North Carolina public school kids now qualify for free and reduced lunch programs. Here too, we've become accustomed to high levels of childhood hunger. Several of our cities, including, as you know, High Point and Greensboro, have been identified in the past as among the most challenged in the country. Statewide, I must say, unlike in High Point, this has failed to trigger cries of outrage or exigency. It's not thought worrisome or traumatic. No legislative programs are launched. More frequently, food stamp benefits are cut off by the General Assembly, removing qualifying Tar Heel kids from the rolls, though it saves not a penny from the state. Though federal recovery funds, thankfully, have given us some relief in the last 18 months. But as Alexander Sirota has explained to me, we didn't sign up for a society that lets kids starve. And if we're one of the worst states for child poverty in the United States, though we possess, as we all know, real economic prowess, how does the United States compare with other advanced democracies? The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights found 2 years ago that the United States is the richest, the poorest, and the most unequal nation in the world. His report concluded that a shockingly high number of children live in poverty in the United States. It is the extreme outlier in child poverty. Nearly twice as many American kids are poor as the average for Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development nations. We rank almost at the bottom of these 38 major free market democracies, behind almost all the European and British Commonwealth nations, of course. But more shocking, we also trail Latvia, South Korea, Lithuania, Estonia, Greece, the Slovak Republic, and Mexico. You would think we would be humiliated. Finally, we can look at how we compare in North Carolina with ourselves over time. In 1969, 1 in 4 of our kids, 25%, were poor. A decade later, by 1979, we'd improved significantly to 20%. By 1989, it had dropped to a little over 15%. But by 2012, we had essentially returned to the mid-20s, and now we're at about that. Eastern counties had made significant progress 25 years ago, but they've now reached again those more soaring levels of poverty. The international comparisons and our own comparisons over time with ourselves are reminders that child poverty levels for us are tied to policy choices. They don't issue from the hand of God. And I think we've all come to know that the impact of poverty and hunger on our children in their earliest years is intense. As Tiffany Gladley has explained, poverty is the biggest risk factor in a child's healthy development and growth. mental health, physical health. As studies repeatedly show, the physical harm caused by food insecurity and child poverty begins even before birth. Maternal food insecurity during pregnancy is associated with birth defects and low birth weight. Very young children whose brains and bodies are developing rapidly need proper nutrients to fuel growth and activity. A subpar diet at this formative stage puts children at higher risk for developmental and cognitive delays. For example, children who had iron deficiency anemia as infants had lower scores when tested on motor and mental functioning at 5 years of age, even though they had been successfully treated in the interim. Food insecure children of all ages are more likely to suffer from frequent headaches and stomach aches and higher rates of chronic illness and poorer health overall. Child food insecurity has also been associated with psychological dysfunction, psychiatric distress, poor academic performance. Hungry children are more likely to struggle in school, to repeat a grade, to receive special education services, or require mental health counseling. Childhood depression, anxiety, irritability, aggression, and suicidal ideation have all been linked to food insecurity. These things we know, even if we would prefer not to. North Carolina, it's tragic to report, is tough on its children. Though the state enjoys significant economic prowess, income, and wealth, stunningly high percentages of its children live in wrenching poverty. Child poverty is joined by soaring rates of childhood food hardship. State poverty and hunger rates are among the very highest in the country here. They leave hundreds of thousands of our kids without meaningful opportunities and diminish their natural rights to thrive, to compete, to develop, and to succeed. The economic and social burdens pressed upon poor children in North Carolina, one would think, ought to be deemed unacceptable to a state that so readily proclaims its commitment to equality and so readily declares how earnestly it values its families. The fact that we seem largely untroubled by the tragedy of childhood poverty only makes the transgression more indefensible and more pointedly hypocritical. An admirable society lifts and values its children beyond any other interest or challenge. Too often we fail to make the necessary connection between childhood success and dignity and a strong economy and society. We rarely ask the foundational question: how can we assure that all North Carolina children have a chance to thrive? Both Democratic and Republican leaders have failed to assure that the plight of our children is our state's highest priority. As my colleague Alexander Sirota has explained to us, we started to see some of these deprivations more clearly with COVID, but they were already there. We chose not to pay attention to them. What would we have done if sustaining our goal had actually been embracing our children? If our main purpose had been to sustain our children's ability to thrive? But we don't press that big question. When will we? In times of disease and unemployment, these toughest burdens have fallen disproportionately on our most vulnerable and too frequently on our youngest members. We have found ourselves insufficiently well prepared to feed, to nurture, to protect, to care for, and to educate our kids. Few things could speak more poorly of our stewardship. Suffer the little children to come unto me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such of these. If we believe we are incapable of addressing the profound evils of child poverty and hunger, then we have lost the ambition and the confidence that marked our forebears. If we believe we could address them, but we choose not to, then our moral failing is complete. Thank you much. I'll stop there, Carl.